And a lot of yoga teachers, I don't mean to be unkind, they think about not being violent, whereas I'm interested in non-violence that's active. So, what are we actually doing to promote peace in the world?
Today with me, I have Nadia Gilani.
The darker side is sort of like the fact that commercialization and capitalism and how yoga's been distorted to kind of become unrecognizable. I spent a lot of my life, listening to that little voice in my head, being unhappy. One of the biggest burdens of my life that I have so many questions, but it's also, I think, what moves me forward. Often people attack me and say that I'm being violent because of things I'm saying that are critical. But actually, I think I'm just thinking and doing an analysis.
The idea is if you look at the way those prophets have led their life, they questioned everything.
And I believe we should question everything. We should question our faith.
I am so glad you could join us. I'm your host, Mo Gaudat. This podcast is nothing more than a conversation between two good friends sharing inspiring life stories and perhaps some nuggets of wisdom along the way. This is your invitation to slow down with us. Welcome to Slow Mo.
Thank you for joining me. Today's episode is one of a mini-series that we're planning for the publication of That Little Voice in Your Head, my third book. That Little Voice is an attempt to explain to us how our brains work. It was triggered by the idea that I noticed that we humans in the modern world have become better at using our digital devices, our phones and computers, than we are at using our brains, which is quite a shocking realization. And so I basically decided that perhaps one good thing I could do for humanity is to explain how our brains work in an analogy to how our computers work. So it's a bit of an analogy between neuroscience and computer science, if you want, which, believe it or not, holds very, very true, because our brains are incredibly predictable, incredibly programmable, and yet we use them with bugs and mistakes. We put the wrong software on them and we run them really badly. And that causes us to struggle in life and to suffer. This mini-series is going to invite incredible wise thinkers and authors and happiness practitioners to discuss their views of how that brain affects their topic of passion. And today I start with one conversation that I believe is spot on. Of course, you may have been exposed to yoga and meditation in the modern world, as I call it, the California flavor yoga and meditation, which in reality is a knockoff, but not really the truth of what the practice is about. Today with me, I have Nadia Gilani, who has written this, the Yoga Manifesto, which is a beautiful, I don't know if it's a biography or if it's a philosophy book. It really is Nadia's story with yoga and yoga's story with the world. It is an idea of how yoga helped Nadia through her life and through some challenging times, but also it's an idea of what yoga itself needs if it was going to save itself and save us today. Nadia is a very successful yoga instructor, and yoga seems to be part of every part of her life. Definitely, as we know, yoga is supposed to be there to help us run the code that manages our brains. So, Nadia, thank you so much for joining me. Very interesting coincidence, both our books launching on the same day, 26th of May.
I know, it's so exciting.
Yeah, I look at yours in its beautiful orange color and beautiful, vulnerable sharing of the story. And I sort of wish yours will sell more. So
thank you.
I hope it will.
I hope they both equally sell loads.
Absolutely. I want to go into the story, but first I will have to share with you, because it's a manifesto. I really share your view. I struggled with yoga for quite some time because the flavors of yoga that I have been exposed to have been in tourist places and in California where I live when I lived there, and in New York City. And in a way, I always felt there was something missing. There was a bit of a void in what they were trying to teach me. And it, in a very interesting way, it almost repulsed me from yoga because it didn't feel real at all. Your story seems to have had almost like a romantic comedy, a bit of ups and downs with the story of yoga. Are you open to tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, sure. I'm curious before I do that to find out when you were doing the yoga, like what sort of time of year it was, what decade?
I started to really focus on yoga after I wrote Solve for Happy. So I basically, when I wrote Solve for Happy, my life became very interesting because I started to mix with a lot of the people that are in the happiness community. And some are incredibly wise people and some are trying to find their way. But yoga and meditation is central to that. So around 7 years ago, basically I find the value in it. I'm actually in that little voice in your head. I talk deeply about how to train your brain using yoga and meditation. But I have to say, I admit I have never really found someone that didn't treat it as a business, if I may say that.
Yeah, no, it definitely has become a business, and I talk about that quite at length in the book. But I mean, the book it's kind of how you described it. I often describe it as my relationship with yoga and yoga's relationship with the world. So it is, part memoir. There is my own personal story going through it, but then I also look out into the world and look at issues in the world, that problems that are going on in the world, like, economic disparities and social problems, racism, and how actually a lot of yoga, modern yoga, is quite divorced from interacting with these things, because yoga's got an attached philosophy to it. It's not just a workout. It's not a vacuous, empty thing. Not saying that exercise isn't a good thing. I mean, we do the postures to purge the body and to cleanse the body and to feel good, right? We do the postures to feel healthy in our bodies, in our minds. We do meditation for the same reason, but that's not all. There's a kind of, we're doing it, it's a means to a greater end, which is enlightenment. And, So I didn't want to write an angry book that was just angry about what's happened. Like you said, you were repulsed. Yeah, sure, I felt the same. But I didn't just want to write an angry book. I wanted to write a book that had hope. And I wanted to write a book with meaning and how, and to show also how my relationship with yoga's changed, because I've not had a love affair with yoga my whole life. I've definitely walked out on it at times and felt let down by it, if you like. And I put all of that in the book.
Mm. So you were just saying that there are so many events in the world, like economic crisis, like COVID, and so on and so forth. And you're saying that yoga should be part of that, should relate to that. That's the first time I hear this at all, actually.
Okay.
Tell me a bit more about that.
Well, briefly, I mean, there's a chapter in the book where I talk a bit about, I call it the academic chapter, although it's not really, but basically there are 8 limbs of yoga, and they're all meant to be done in a specific order. And there are certain things that, in terms of observances and how we should behave. So things like, there's one tenet of philosophy, yoga philosophy, which is non-violence. And a lot of yoga teachers, I don't mean to be unkind, but a lot of yoga teachers sort of talk about how they think about not being violent, whereas I'm interested in non-violence that's active. So, what are we actually doing to promote peace in the world? So it's a coincidence that I'm wearing a Black Lives Matter t-shirt.
I just noticed.
It's a coincidence, actually, but I do write about this in the book because the book is coming out after COVID, and I was working on the second draft, and so I wrote about the murder of George Floyd, and I found it, I was very upset at the time, and I found it really difficult, and I think it was exacerbated because we were all at home, and the world's reaction to it was interesting to see, and then everybody started getting interested in diversity and all these things that I just felt like these are not new things, but the point is, I've heard lots of people talk about how great it is to be non-violent, but actually non-violent for me is about being active. And we've got so many great examples of that in history with the civil rights movement in America, they weren't passive. It was active nonviolence, and then also in South Asia, where with the British Empire, that was civil disobedience. So ahimsa for me is about taking action. And I think if you're really going to be properly practicing yoga, we need to think about the world we're living. We need to be engaged in the world that we're living in.
Why do you think the world has come to this? I mean, in an interesting way, I have my theories on, even how COVID itself led to a lot of unattachment, if you want. The fact that we rallied the streets for Black Lives Matter at the time of COVID, honestly, it was an anomaly. It seems to me that this was not what was intended when everyone was being locked down. I think there was a requirement from the world for people to be locked down. I don't believe it was just a virus, to be honest. Conspiracy theory, everyone. But the truth is, even when that happens, I think what really touches my heart is that it's still not happening, right? I mean, we have not solved the problem, and yet humans are back to work and back to bars and pubs and back to their yoga classes. And we forgot the issue. We forgot the reality that Black lives still matter and that Black lives are still unjustly treated, and that every life in minorities is being treated that way, and that we haven't solved our empowerment of the feminine, and that there are wars in the world where people are subjected to violence. And humans seem to have forgotten, yoga or not. Why do you think this is happening?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. It's something that I've been thinking about as well. I mean, I'm quite astounded by that return to the pubs and the bars and things, because this huge thing has happened and we've all been affected by it in different ways. And I'm not the same person. And I do feel I want to keep this conversation hopeful, but I do, just a reality check, I do sometimes have a look at the world, and I think just to keep a reality check about it, I get quite sad sometimes. I think, gosh, why isn't it different? Because like you said, I felt the same actually. Maybe there was a real need for the world to lock down. It wasn't just the virus, because I felt like the world was spinning a bit too fast, and the world is on fire, in terms of just the earth, in terms of the way that we're living, these 24-hour lives we have. And, I don't think I was living in a particularly sustainable way myself. I was stressed all the time. You talk about this and you've written about this, and, because you've had that experience yourself, where you're depression and living in a way, I'm not really sure why we're living in that way, but just it's the only way we know how. And then you stop, pause, which is lockdown, an example of a global version of that. And then we have time to reflect. And it's not easy when we reflect. It's not easy to look inside your shirt and see what's in there. So maybe people are returning back to what they knew before because it's hard to do that work. I don't know why that's happened, because I talk to a therapist and there's ups and downs there, and it's difficult at times. And then I think sometimes when I'm having a nice time in therapy, no, because
what is that?
Well, there have been. I think because I was having a tricky time recently, and I said to him, I feel like I'm going backwards. And my therapist said to me, I think maybe we were getting a bit comfortable because I was kind of starting to enjoy, in the sense that things are making sense, and I was getting a bit comfortable. And then we turned a corner, I think, and then a few weeks ago, and it was kind of like, that was a bit difficult. I'm really confused again. And what do I do now? And, I think that's where the work is, where we sort of hit that kind of point. And we have to go through that. And I write about that in the book. And I know you've talked about this a lot.
It's quite, I think it's spot on. The fact, one of the answers, I tell the whole world, and I'm open about it, that I've been struggling with that concept that I feel is very important for my soul, which is a concept I call half monk, to find time to reflect and avoid the 25-hour days. Not necessarily as a monk, but at least as a half monk, 50% of my time. And I've been questioning, and, with my wonderful daughter, Aya, who's here today. Hello, Aya. We were chatting about the idea of maybe I can invest in a farm somewhere and be a little bit off the grid, and, not all the time, but of course I still have a very busy life. And I kept asking myself, why am I not doing this? And the answer was what you said. I don't know anything else. Okay, I've lived my entire life in the mainstream. Through the corporate world, it was the maximum speed And then now, even as I'm working on my happiness mission, I still have that skill set within me. It's a very good skill set. It enables you to reach billions, and it's really, really powerful. But it's not the way we humans are supposed to be. And that brings me a little bit back to yoga. When yoga wasn't the thing you do after work, when yoga wasn't the thing that you go and buy Lululemon pants for, when yoga was an integral part of the lives of people who were rich, poor, in the farms, or there were no yoga studios to think about it. Tell us a little bit about that point in history. Yoga being part of life rather than yoga being the brand that you wear after you go through life.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm really interested in modern life and how yoga interacts with modern life. I'm more than going back into, I don't believe that yoga should be practiced the way that it was 100,000 million years ago. Mm-hmm. Far from it. I've got a very liberal approach to the practice myself. And when I say that, I mean that I'm looking at the practice in terms of how it can be applied to modern life, how it relates to modern life, which is why I was talking about, non-violence, for example. And, some of the other tenets we look at, is truth is another one that's really important to me. And I think about, what that means in terms of my life. But in the olden days, if you like, yoga is a way it's about reaching enlightenment and about living a good way for yourself and in order to live well so that everybody else is in harmony. We're in harmony with the universe. In lots of ways, yoga is a philosophy for life, the way that religion gives guidance to people. It's not that different. It's just another way. I think people have faith to guide them and show them the way and to give them something to believe in. Yoga's that as well. It gives you a framework. And so, but you don't have to, same as you, actually. Maybe I'd never thought about it in the monk capacity, but actually, same as you. I've been on most of my life searching for belonging, searching for guidance, and looking to faiths, looking to Buddhism. I had a Muslim upbringing and that wasn't enough. I needed to keep looking. I'd look at congregations outside mosques and really want that, but I didn't feel part of it. Yoga was there and just always looking. And maybe part of me is kind of more at peace now. And I think the book has come at a good time and this conversation is coming at a good time because I'm very grateful for where I am now, because it's not just yoga that sustains me anymore. It's an amalgam of so many things. And I think that yoga is it's like an inspiration for me, but it's something that I think about a lot. I think what's missing in modern yoga is when people have attacked me, because I have been attacked by trolls for some of the things I've written, and it's been really unpleasant. But often people attack me and say that I'm being violent because of things I'm saying that are critical. But actually, I think I'm just thinking and doing an analysis and questioning. Yeah. And I believe we should question everything. We should question our faith. That's the way that I was brought up with the Islamic faith anyway. It was like, question it. What are your big questions about the Quran? Not, this is the rule book, which, maybe some people do it that way and that's fine, but that's not the way that I was taught. And I guess it's one of the biggest burdens of my life that I have so many questions, but it's also, I think, what moves me forward. We need to ask questions of yoga.
Very interesting. I mean, one of my, the thoughts that I ponder myself all the time is if you're a religious person and you're following a certain teaching, and so you believe in a certain book, a certain prophet, if the idea was, okay, here is a user manual, use that book, the faith, it wouldn't teach you to follow the prophet. And if every faith I know is, Buddhists will say behave like Buddha, Islam will say behave like Muhammad. And the idea is, if you look at the way those prophets have led their life, they questioned everything. They literally, Buddha left his whole life behind and basically went and, explored himself as he walked the world until he sits under the tree. Muhammad went and sat in a cave for months and months to try and reflect. Moses had to walk the desert. And
I suspect they weren't happy. Buddha wasn't happy. Yeah. Buddha was aware of how much suffering there was in the world. They were questioning people, which is why I want to learn from people who go on that journey. I'm interested in people who mess up, who make mistakes, who contemplate and think, rather than people who are just spouting the, and again, this is not to be unkind, and I say this in the kind of I don't mean to be unkind. This is just saying it as I'm less interested in people who have read the books and are kind of spouting the book says. I'm interested in people who have integrated and thought, this is what it means to me. And that's what I've done in the book. Because that's hopefully more relatable. But also I need to kind of make it work for me. And the only way I'm going to do that is and you do that with your writing and in your life, and you put yourself in your books. And those are the books that I like reading, where people put themselves in the books rather than, I mean, I know that you've got quite a mathematical scientific mind.
That's myself for sure.
And I
put
do
that
not.
100% in my books.
You're very scientific in your formula and fascinated by that, because I am not like that. And I've always, I'm not like that at all. I'm very chaotic, very sort of, I suppose we're both creative in different ways. Like I think
that's how it should be.
Yeah, it's very messy. It's very, I'm very blue sky thinking, very big, wide. And somehow through the madness, this comes out of it. And I've heard about your writing process, because I've heard you talk about that. And, it's very strategic. You write the last line. And I thought, oh my gosh, I don't know where I'm going. I have a rough idea. And the thing is, it works for me and I found my way. And, your way isn't the right way. My way isn't the right way. But it's great that we're talking and we're learning from each other. And
yeah, I mean, one of my next books, which is hopefully out end of the year, I'm writing with a co-author, a wonderful young lady, stress management expert here in the UK, Alice Law. And Alice writes like you. She has something in her heart and she pours that on the paper. And I write like almost a mathematician. Like if you asked me to write a book and I could manage to confine the book to the number 42, I'll probably do that. You have a 200-page book that has one page on it that says 42. That's it, right? That's all we need, really, in my mind. But when the experience of writing together is actually quite liberating for me, because as I read Alice's work, I promise you, almost every second page, I go like, where is she going with this? Like in my structured mind, I need a bullet point as an anchor to know where I am. And then eventually every second page I go like, I gasp, like really, oh my God, that feels amazing. I didn't understand it in my head. I felt it in my heart. And that's a very, very, very valuable skill, if you ask me. And I think from your writing, that way you also somehow have that beautiful, no filter approach to things. You're like simply...
I am fairly unfiltered, yeah. But with, there is, obviously, in order to write a book, this is my first time. I mean, I have a very tangential mind and brain. You might have noticed that in some of my responses. I do sometimes go off on tangents and I write that way. And it's really, really unhelpful to me that I write that way, because it's a longer process. It means that I have to go back and keep to the point so the reader doesn't get lost, because you can't just give a reader that, you have to kind of tidy it up and make it better. But I do love the editing process. I know that you...
Oh, we edit quite extensively.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I did remember, I think I heard you say that you prefer the writing process and the editing is grindy and challenging.
The first edit is actually part of the writing. So normally what I do is I write way more than I publish. My fourth book is coming out end of the year. I've written at least 7.5 books, and I don't publish a lot of it. So what I do is I write first, then I look at the book and I almost rewrite it. I don't retype everything. I cut and paste and move things around, but the structure and the coherence becomes a lot better. And I think that process of the first edit is the most joyful.
I love that.
Yeah.
I loved it.
It really makes, it takes the knowledge, the information and turns it into knowledge.
And you see it.
Yeah, you see the big picture.
The shape is there and totally, I mean, you've been through it more than me, but totally I had that. But yeah, I'm pretty unfiltered. People always say that to me. And it's interesting because I guess I'm really about keeping it real. I don't think I know it, going back to the idea of like not knowing any other way. I think I don't really know how to be guarded really, but I think I always know, like I know what I've left out of the book. I know what I took out. And there's lots of stuff that I talk really openly about, but I've been quite careful because I talk about my relationship with, my mother's in the book quite a bit. And, I was quite thoughtful about what I exposed about my life that was going to then expose her. And there's also certain things that I wrote about my life that are really difficult, but I didn't want it to be a slashing wrists in public situation, because I don't think that's helpful. I'm solution focused. So I like to talk about the problems if it's going to mean that I can, dwell a bit more on the solution, and also share enough of my difficulty and pain in order to let people know that they're not alone. But then
that's beautiful.
But it doesn't have to be, I do really love the Oscar Wilde quote, that we're all in the gutter, but some of us are looking at the stars. I do really love that, because, there's hope, but I don't need to kind of drag you into the gutter with me. I can just sort of tell you about, what it was like there. And it was really hard, but there's hope. And that's really key. The key thesis, I guess, in the book, hope is I like to think that there's a lot of hope in there. And some of the people who've read the book already, the early editions, the early proofs, have sort of said that they've kind of got that. And I'm really pleased that I managed to communicate that.
So why is it a manifesto? Why do you call it the Yoga Manifesto?
Well, it's a good word. And
it really is. And I'm surprised that nobody wrote a book with that title before. Someone should have grabbed that title.
Do you know, it came about because, again, COVID was going on forever, wasn't it? And I guess when we were coming out of lockdown, I had been on Instagram mainly. I was writing about some of the ideas in the book on social media, and it just took off. People got really interested in some of the things that I was writing about. And I guess because I have to keep things interesting, because I get bored. So I can't just keep talking about the same things again and again. And I just, I'm known as the Yoga Dissident on Instagram. And I just basically, one day I just wrote the Yoga Dissidence Manifesto. And I think a year later, when I'd finished the first draft, I was still without a title. And I had so many different titles. Gosh, I was lying awake at night, thinking about titles.
So it's like calling, finding a name for your child, really.
Isn't it hard?
Yeah.
Looking at titles on what I visited my mother. I was looking at her house is full of books, and I was looking at titles for inspiration. I was listening to music. And then there it was staring at us one day. Somebody at the publisher said, "What about the Yoga Manifesto?" And I thought, oh my gosh, it was already there on my Instagram. And it's always the way, isn't it? Like the simplest thing. I had to go through all the different, because nothing was right. Nothing was quite right. But the reason, in answer to your long-winded, I do that. Sorry, tangential. But in answer to your question, the reason why I called it the manifesto is because it's very much a personal story about me, but it does then look outwards into the world. And then, well, what am I going to leave with the reader? I wanted to give the reader something. You can't just close the book and think, well, that's that then. Yoga's great and what the world's done to it's awful. The end. I needed to...
That's a good story.
I don't know if it is. Like, you can't leave. I think you don't want people to shut it and think, oh, God, this book. I needed to kind of the hope. So the manifesto is about hope. It's about... But it's not... I suppose the only thing that, there is a risk of maybe not, because the blurb at the back explains it, or the blurb on the inside cover explains it, but it's not telling people what to do. I've got eight pillars, or they're not necessarily steps actually, like the 8 limbs are meant to be done in order, but these are 8 limbs, 8 pillars for 8 ideas for things that people can do to maybe improve yoga in the world. And they're meant for inspiration, because I don't like telling people what to do. I'm very careful about that in the book. Like I sort of talk about how I think things should be, but then I'm not copping out, but I don't want to tell you what to do, because people do sometimes ask me, what shall I do? And I sort of think, no, that's your job. I'm here to tell you, I'm working, I've been sitting here thinking, and doing and writing and living my life and having difficult experiences as a yoga teacher, and questioning things and working it out for myself. And I'm sharing my story to help you work it out for yourself. But I want you to do that work. I'm just going to give you some ideas for things that might work, but not everything's going to work everywhere.
So let's focus on yoga a little bit. I actually don't know what the 8 limbs are. You shared 2, but I mean, I don't know if you'll remember all 8 of them off your head.
I'll try and do it.
Yeah.
So I talk about them. So, the 8 limbs are, I call it in the book actually a prescription for moral conduct and self-discipline. So yoga is a discipline. But, like in Buddhism, there are guidances, and we have, I'm really interested in Zen. And we have, in the tradition of Thich Nhat Hanh, I talk about him in the book actually, and there are the 5 mindfulness trainings. And they're 5 things for, way to live your life and things that are good to do, but they're kind of suggestions. And this is kind of the way here as well. So these are suggestions. It's not like of course I say things that are maybe a bit aggressive sometimes, and, I don't get it right all the time, but these are things that we look for inspiration. So the yamas there are 5 guidelines, and we've got ahimsa, which is non-violence, satya, which is truthfulness. I really like that one. Asteya, which is non-stealing. But again, I turn that around quite a lot and think about what does it mean actively. So maybe not taking more than my fair share, maybe giving generously.
Oh, beautiful.
Paying people if we're responsible for that. The at the beginning of these Sanskrit words it negates it, so that it's asteya, non-stealing. But I'm interested in, as I say, really interested in
actively doing an action around that.
Yeah, I just think that's more important. Practice is active; it's not a passive thing. It's a verb, isn't it? So I suppose it's a noun as well when we're talking about yoga practice. But brahmacharya, which is the right use of energy. So this is often linked to sex, but. And I guess you could think about, the way we have our relationships and thinking about treating people fairly and being kind to ourselves in relationships we get into. But I think it's also about not burning ourselves out. I've definitely done that in life, burning the candle. And I think I have a tendency for that. So it's about keeping an eye on it. I'm very sort of like all or nothing. So, I just kind of keep going. And then I crash and I need to know, okay, it's time to just pause, recharge the battery, and then... But, a wise person doesn't do that. A wise person would be right with their energy all the time. So, I'm on the journey. Non-greed is the next one. And then we've got 4 niyamas, which is cleanliness, like I mentioned, contentment, which is very lovely, difficult, challenging one, but really wonderful when you get it, when you get moments of that. Tapas, which is one of my favorites, and that means a lot to me, which is austerity. And I like to think of it as transformation. I really believe in the power of transformation now. I've seen it happen in my own life. I didn't believe in it for a long time. Svadhyaya, which is self-study. And then quickly the other limbs, we've got asana, which is the postures, pranayama, which deals with breath control, pratyahara, which is sense withdrawal. So that's not so...
Sense withdrawal?
Withdrawal, yeah. So that's not necessarily so straightforward, but I like to think of it as sometimes if I'm getting flustered in London, where I live, with all the people and, the noise, and it's getting a bit, a very basic way of me maybe practicing that is to kind of just lower my gaze to minimize all the external distractions and to listen to my breath. So I just slow my breath down and I listen to the sounds I might listen to, and then I might move in and listen to the sound closest to me, which is my breath. And that's really basic, but it works for me, and it just returns me back to here.
I think it applies to everything, overstimulation in general in our world today. You come back home from a very busy day, and what you do, you switch Netflix on and you have your phone in your hand and you're doing 6 things at the same time.
Yeah.
That's like the extreme opposite of
shutting down, just really, closing in.
Yeah.
And it prepares you for meditation, because all of this is designed to help us for meditation. So sense withdrawal leads to concentration. And again, we do that. It's different to meditation, because meditation is when you move into that through concentration. And then number 8, I did actually question whether this actually even existed for a long time, but it's enlightenment, samadhi. And I don't believe that samadhi is a permanent state. I believe that I've had moments of samadhi, in my life. It's like nirvana, like having moments of, oh my gosh, eureka moments, or when you have that, when all the planets are aligned and everything is, all the stars are growling because it's all coming and it's going to happen, and when you have that feeling, I think that's samadhi. I think that's just enlightenment. When you know that when you've got the guidance, you must have had that.
That's probably true. I mean, in my view, I believe that your soul is always enlightened, right? So your soul always knows, and enlightenment really is a moment where you have managed to switch off from your attachment to the physical enough to be able to connect to your soul in a way where your soul will tell you something. And your soul is not just your soul, it's all of being. It's all that is out there, that is non-physical, that we can connect to. I mean, in my view of my experience of losing my son, for example, I've had many conversations, not just signs, like almost real conversations with my son, who is a being that's part of the universal consciousness, if you want, that is able to connect in moments of enlightenment if you allow it in. I want to go to number 7, concentration, because in that little voice in your head, in my third book, coming out at the same time as yours, I call this deliberate attention. And deliberate attention, believe it or not, is linked. I've done a lot of research. There is a lot of actual neuroscientific research that almost all of the well-known extreme mental health conditions are associated with the lack of deliberate attention. So anything from depression to PTSD to, of course, ADHD is at the
Even
beginning.
psychosis.
Some and some not, but many of the conditions that are sort of mentally relatable to mental health basically are stemming from the fact that there will be a very high correlation with the fact that this person is unable to concentrate. Okay, and our brains, there was a study in Stanford that basically talks about the fact that when you let your brain loose in terms of incessant thinking, the brain's tendency is to go a lot more into the negative side of incessant thinking. And you can see that. You don't need a study for that, right? That when you're sitting down, you're rarely ever, even in your lunch break or having a cup of coffee, you're rarely ever saying, oh, that's so amazing. Yesterday I did this and it was wonderful. And tomorrow I might be doing that and it's wonderful. Most of the time, this incessant thinking is simply just telling you, oh, this is going to go wrong and that was horrible. And, I hate this and I don't like that. And that negativity basically can be reduced drastically when you start to pay deliberate attention. And yoga and meditation are at the core of that, at the core of the practice that trains your brain to be able to pay that attention so that you can get out of the negative mental conditions. As you describe yoga now, again, I'm going to say this with love and respect. Even my wonderful ex, Nibel, has a beautiful fitness center in Dubai, and they teach yoga sometimes the real way, but sometimes the California way, right? It's like
there's lots of the California way there. I've seen it.
Absolutely, right?
Yeah.
People come and they get together, Lululemons, everyone, and we will use some Sanskrit words. And it's not really what you're describing at all. It's none of those 8 limbs. There is no, it's restricted to the studio. It doesn't go outside the meditation room. And in your book, you talk about, I should say, of course, by the way, in Nibel's fitness center, she also has the real yoga. She has amazing teachers that I know that are really, really taking the practice properly, just so that she doesn't get upset with me. But and because she's wonderful. No, but the idea is that it is very rare to come across, a yoga teacher or a yoga studio that will take you through the whole practice. That would probably more be of a, like a spiritual temple, sort of, right?
Yeah.
And in your book, you talk about the darker side of the industry. Give me a few examples. What went wrong?
So the darker side is kind of what you touched on, really. It's sort of like the fact that commercialization and capitalism and how yoga's been distorted in a way that's kind of become unrecognizable. But you see, just before I go into that more, just what you've said, of course, I mean, yoga studios can't do the whole thing. They've got a business to run and they're going to, we can't maybe necessarily expect them to just cover everything. But, it's, so when people go to a practice, go to a class, I suppose what could be done is to make it kind of form part of a bigger thing. So people go to the practice, like, you might go to mosque or church to kind of be with others who practice the same way as you. But then you're on your own journey. And I think the thing there's so many different styles of yoga, and I write about them, and I take, I'm not always the kindest about some of them. I suppose that's there's so many different styles of yoga, and I'm always having people come to me and say they're confused by the difference between them.
Yeah.
And there's a few different styles or methods, I suppose I call them routes to practice that emerged in South Asia, different ways of practicing the same thing. And I talk about 23 in the book, but there are loads that have been invented by Western Westerners, people in the Western world, a lot actually from America. And I think it's because people have gone traveling and they've liked the practice, the physical practice, because it feels amazing. All these weird shapes we do, that's what I fell in love with. The gateway for the practice for a lot of us is the physical shapes and the postures. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but then to acknowledge that there's more to it, and it's for your benefit. Actually, you're going to win. Like I say, I'm not interested in being a nun or following a set of rules. I like ripping things up. I like tearing things apart and questioning, going back to that idea of questioning everything. And I do that with the yoga. I don't agree with everything in the philosophy. I'm not blindly following it all. I'm interested in it because it fascinates me, because it opens my mind to away from the negative thinking, actually, like talking about what you're saying, sorry, I've gone off the point, but that's the dark side. The dark side is the money making. The dark side is the whiteness and the lack of diversity. The dark side is traveling. I mean, when I went to Bali before the pandemic came to the UK, it's so separate there. There's Indonesians working in these yoga studios who are not benefiting from this wellness culture that has ended up in Bali. And Bali has got yoga studios which are full of travelers and full of Westerners, but they're not kind of it's not benefiting the local people. That's the dark side to me.
That's a very dark side. That's not to be ignored. I mean, I don't. We can avoid this if you want to, but you say the whiteness. Everyone's free to practice yoga.
Everybody's free to practice yoga, and of course you can practice yoga if you're white, and of course you can teach it. I just think that it's become quite dominated by. I think another one of the darker sides is the fact that the slim-limbed, bendy, often blonde kind of image we see of yoga is not it. I mean, of course, there's going to be people who look like that, who practice yoga that way. Great. And handstands they do exist in yoga, but that's not the only thing. I've taught yoga with refugees and, in community centres where we were cramped, doing strange shapes with our bodies. And in some ways they were doing like the real practice, because they were often wearing, really clothes that were really not easy for them to move around in. And we did a kind of more honest practice. We would concentrate, we would meditate, we would do these strange things that were really uncomfortable to do. And we weren't kind of sipping green juices and taking handstands on beaches. And, do you know what I mean? That's the kind of thing.
I love what you're saying.
The whiteness thing is because I stole from, there's a few puns in the book, and I like playing with words, and the unbearable lightness of being. I just kind of talk about the unbearable whiteness of yoga in the book, and it's that I've just described.
It's a shocking fact, actually. This word caught my attention because I just watched a documentary on Netflix called White Hot about Abercrombie and Finch. It was shocking, really, how somehow the marketing of fashionable things, we've had the story with Victoria's Secret and so on and so forth, tends to be very, very uninclusive. And for some reason, you're right, and we accept that in a way. And I think it's quite interesting. I don't know if that's true, but it would be quite interesting if we really wanted yoga to deliver what it's supposed to deliver to the world, it has to be welcoming for everyone, shouldn't it be?
It has to be welcoming for everyone and inclusive for everyone. And that goes back to the philosophy, because the philosophy about non-stealing, that's what I meant.
That's such a beautiful way of saying it.
But that's what I meant about the generosity. I spin it around in terms of what can we do when we look at our businesses. Are we paying people fair? I mean, I don't have a business, but I'm just saying, and how we treat people, thinking about that and who's missing. Are we only serving a few people, or are we serving more people? I think, like you say, it's kind of, we do accept this, but we accept many ills in the world. We accept racism. I personally don't, but we live in a world where it's going on. We live in a world where I live in a country that is in denial about institutional racism. I was born here. And I think that's because it's hard to look at that. But in order to move forward, you have to reconcile with the difficult things you've done. And I mean, I'm not here to do a bashing of the British Empire, but, you know, it did some terrible things. And the only way to kind of to reconcile that is to look at it in the way perhaps Germany did that with its own past. And I think if we look at yoga, you know, in a way, it's I suppose in one way we could say that it's been colonized because it's serving a small number of people rather than the many. And I want it to be for anyone. I'm not saying everybody should practice yoga, by the way, because it's not going to work. It's not going to be for everyone. And like I say, I certainly walked out on it, and I certainly had moments where it wasn't working for me. But if people want it in their life, they should have it in their life. And I think the only way that they're going to make that decision is if we show it to them, put it in front of more people.
You're clearly a yoga activist, a yoga gangster of some sort.
Well, you know, that's a fun thing to say, isn't it? I mean, I've got quite a punk ethos, and like I say, I like tearing things up, and I do that in the book. I tear up the industry, and then I put it back together, but in a new order. Or maybe I think about, maybe we destroy that and we build a new one. But it's I don't know about activism, because I've really look up to activists. You know, like I named, you know, I thought the civil rights movement in America, and, you know, we look at the civil disobedience in colonized India. I mean, that's a lot of work, and I don't know whether I really qualify as an activist, but I am.
Yes, you do.
I do have a lot of opinions. I do have a lot of opinions, and I talk about them.
Yeah, yes, you do. I mean, in an interesting way, I have to say I've never really looked at it this way, honestly, because, as you rightly said, I think the bendy body shapes has been really what was sold to me, and you know, my body is not very bendy anyway. So, and yeah.
So did you think then that yoga wasn't for you? Not made for people like you?
Absolutely.
Well, yeah, that's the problem.
Yeah, absolutely.
I work with lots of men who have, you know, football or injuries from football and things like that.
That's my past.
That's your past, right. And then they tentatively, and I've ended up with some people, I've had like men coming to my classes, and then, you know, and they stay. I'm glad, because I like to think that I'm inclusive. And I've worked with people privately who have so much strength in their upper body, men again, and they get quite despondent because they think, oh, I can't do it. And then I have to kind of, you know, because I'm always at odds calling myself a yoga teacher, really, because I'm just somebody on the journey as well. But I am there to kind of guide them. And I sort of have to kind of try and show them that there's nothing wrong with you. This is your body.
Thank you for saying that.
There's nothing wrong with you. And actually, if anything, I've spent my life trying to get stronger. And then there's people I work with who are stronger, men, women as well. But, you know, there are men who are stronger. And actually, we're going to work with flexibility for you. And I'm working on strength. But also looking internally, thinking about Becky, that little voice in your head, and looking at how you deal with the postures. Because actually, there's somebody I work with who really pushes a lot, strives, ex-lawyer, unsurprising, I was better at this last week. And I have to remind him, permit me for saying, you know, we're here to observe. And I'm somebody who's very much like him, actually, who's got that tendency to keep pushing and pushing. And, oh, I could do that last time. But actually, I'm really grateful again for being further down the journey where I notice it. And I think, hang on a second, you're doing that again. Okay, then just go ahead and do it. Sometimes I just let myself. But then other times I think, well, you know, remember what it is, remember what, you know, the practice, and remember that this is an opportunity to learn and maybe soften. Because my tendency is to push. But like you said earlier in the conversation, you know, your tendency is that's what you know.
Yeah.
It would be easier for you to keep doing that. But you're on the journey, you're on the same journey as I am, because you're asking these questions and you're interrogating that little voice. And that's going to be your way out of this, and maybe finding the farm one day, not to live on the farm permanently, because I don't think I'm ever going to be happy living on a mountain like a hermit, even though I love the idea of it. I like going on retreat, love it. It charges me up, but I need other people and I need the buzz and I need these conversations, and I need, I need other people. I wouldn't survive. I'd probably die. You know, it's incredible what Buddha did.
I'd be doing fine.
Would you? Would you?
I mean, I'd probably produce a book every month and a half,
Yeah.
And
I couldn't be with my thoughts for all that time.
Leave me with my thoughts, please.
Well, that's an admirable thing.
Oh my God! So let's link those two. I mean, I'll say this very interestingly. Yesterday I was talking at the YPO, a global event. Amazing thinkers and very successful people, 200-300 people in the room.
What's the YPO?
Young Presidents Organization. And of course, I spoke about my typical foundation of happiness, understanding the happiness equation and so on. But then I spoke a lot about some of the content in that little voice, the idea of the wrong inputs into our brain, the polarity of the feminine and the masculine, what I call the happiness flow chart and so on. And at the end of the session, someone came to me, a gentleman from India. His face looked like an angel. He knows peace. He knows peace. And then he walked to me slowly, unlike the others, and then put his hand on my shoulder and said, "You're a yogi." And the first answer that came to my head, I didn't say it out loud, is, of course I'm not, right? But then I asked him, what do you mean? And he said, you think like a yogi, you act like a yogi. I'm not, I didn't do a single bendy pause on the stage. What does that mean?
I think he means that you're on the journey, because people often, because yogi has become like not a dirty word, but because it's been so distorted, I've never really described myself as a yogi, but I suspect he means that you're on a journey, you're on the path, because I think maybe when we reach enlightenment, there's this idea that it stops. What do we do when we get there? Exactly. Which is why I think we have samadhi, moments of enlightenment through our lives, and it shows us the way. Like, we might turn left here, we might turn right. We might not go into that relationship or into that job. These are moments of glimmers of wisdoms that we have, and I suspect that's what he meant.
So how does yoga relate to that little voice in your head? I mean, what does it do to our little voice?
That's an interesting question. I think yoga would be, for meditation, I often have people who come to me and they say, oh, I can't meditate, I can't sit still. And I say to them, well, yeah, I couldn't sit still for ages either, for years. We learn to sit still by sitting still, is what I usually tell them. Because I had thoughts blaring and I kept running away. I didn't want to do meditation. I didn't want to sit still. It was just too painful. And I suppose Becky is blaring in your head, potentially, for many of us. The little voice in your head. And it's such a flaw. It's almost like a curse, isn't it? That why have we been wired this way towards the negative? But okay, we have to accept.
For survival.
For survival, sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what it is, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And we've got this thing now, and we need to kind of antagonize it and kind of question it. I feel like I'm questioning it all the time. But meditation is actually the space between, I think. It's actually about observing Becky. And, we often use our breath to focus on. And we often use, like in yoga, there's the third eye, which is the seat of our wisdom, and it's meant to be here. And you can just send the internal gaze there if you close the eyes. But sometimes, like I said, when I lower my gaze, I keep the eyes open to just minimize the external distractions, look at my breath. And sometimes I look at the thoughts. If they're so loud and I can't take myself away from them, but I look at the breath, the thoughts might be coming up. You look at them, you take yourself back to the breath. And it's about creating space, I think.
And I think over time, I speak about that quite a lot, actually, in that little voice in your head. I need permission to quote you on what you said. We learn to sit still by sitting still.
I think so.
That's the truth. That's the ultimate truth of neuroplasticity, which is exactly how things are. If you've not sat still all your life, you've been training yourself to not sit still. And I think this goes back to your point about being actively engaging and practicing. The idea is, yes, sitting still is a skill, and if you constantly are refusing that skill, you're learning another skill, which is to jump up and down all over the place. And by practicing sitting still, you get that skill over time. And neuroplasticity works in every in every possible way. I cite Matthew Ricard in my book, one of my favorite humans on the planet, and probably one of the best known monks. He was a guest here on season 1. If you haven't heard the episode, please go back and listen to it. And Mathieu basically was brain scanned in MRI machines while he was meditating, and his brain behaved very different than normal humans. His prefrontal cortex, his insula were configured differently. They were bigger than the average human. They functioned differently than the average human. And that's neuroplasticity. That's 60,000 hours of lifetime meditation for him. But those hours, whatever the hours, even if 10 minutes a day, they start to reshape the way you do things. And I think that makes a mega difference. So let me end with a couple of questions. First, you said it's a book of hope. So I have to admit, in this conversation, you truly gave me hope. Like, I'm actually curious about yoga again. Okay?
I'm really pleased.
Yeah, and I think there is something in the beauty of what you described in terms of this is a discipline. This is not an hour in the studio, right? This is a lifestyle, if you want. It starts from your cleanliness of your body and thoughts all the way to, being with a community that wants to find enlightenment. I think that's beautiful in every way. You say you have 8 ideas to bring hope back to yoga. So give me your first top 2, top 3.
Yeah, there's quite a few different ideas in the book, and I will just open them to remind myself. Again, like I said earlier, I'm not here to tell people what to do, but I look at different areas that we can. So I guess because I spend so much time talking about the wellness industry, and I'm talking about businesses and big heavyweights, we've named some brands earlier. So I've got businesses, brands, and social media influencers. So people with power, ideas, things that they could do. And I think they could look at their branding, they could look at the, marketing, the way that the narrative that they're telling, and also looking internally at going back to the non-stealing idea, thinking about paying people fairly and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, to live as per the ethos of yoga.
Yeah.
So if you're branded with yoga, at least live as per that ethos.
Well, I think that's a no-brainer, isn't it? Should be. I mean, I think there shouldn't be any irony here. There needs to be live by, I think you've got to walk the talk.
Yeah, but I think that's also up to us as consumers, right? So
yeah.
if you want to be branded with real yoga, demand that the brands that you use are actually living as per the ethos of yoga. I think that's wonderful.
Yeah, and I think that's actually this is one of the things in the book as well. So I do a little call to action to students, and that would be people like you and I, practitioners, people who follow the discipline of the practice, to question more and to kind of think about where we practice yoga. Which businesses are we upholding? Are we in the same way that we might kind of think about where our meat comes from if we eat meat, or think about where we buy our goods from, avoiding sweatshops and thinking about what your yoga is kind of doing in the world, and where you're getting it from, who you're learning from. I think question your teachers. I am happy for people to come and ask my questions, because I spent a lot of my life, listening to that little voice in my head, being unhappy. And I've written about that in the book. And I think teachers who pretend that they don't have Becky going on in their head, or teachers who, I would question that. I would question that. We all have this
Absolutely.
stuff coming up.
Yeah.
And then, of course, teachers and teacher trainings. So there are, I don't know if you're aware, but there are hundreds of teacher trainings all over the world going on all the time. And you can actually train to be a yoga teacher in 30 days, which I just cannot get my head around that, given the responsibility that it is as a job. You're kind of taking care of people. I don't think you can kind of do that in 30 days. So I think people who offer teacher trainings need to think about the way that they offer them, maybe think about what they are teaching on them, and also thinking about when they take people on to do the trainings, because a lot of people go to do trainings for careers. I did my teacher trainings. I've done a couple. The first one was just because I wanted to deepen my study and I wanted to be with others who were studying. And the second one was for the same reason. I didn't go straight out and start teaching yoga. In fact, I didn't actually want to teach yoga. It sort of happened by accident. So I think people need to take people onto their trainings who've done a bit of the work first, because I use a lot of my own personal experience when I teach, because again, I don't really want to just follow the rule book, and I want to talk about this is what works for me. You try it. But then I like it when people tell me back, you know, I like doing this. I want to learn from you. So I think it's good for people who are offering trainings to think about what they're offering, who they're taking on, but then also teachers, we might think about where we offer our services, who we're teaching, and also think about communities where yoga isn't offered. And of course, we've got to make a living, but that's where we can think creatively about collaborating. You know, why don't we? I would love to work with a brand, and then we could then go and find hard to reach, so-called hard to reach communities, you know, or communities that are deliberately silenced, I like to say, or pushed out, like these refugee groups I was working with, who could fund it. That's an ethical thing that a big business could do. That way they make their money, but then they put their money where their yoga is, you know?
Oh, beautiful. I have to say, I really enjoyed this conversation. I'll close with my typical question. If you had one secret to happiness you want to share with our listeners, what would your secret be?
So that's a really difficult question.
Of course it is. It's
Right
the most
at the
difficult
end.
question on the planet.
I'm going to answer that by saying, you know, something that I came to recently was, I think for me, it's about looking for peace. And I don't know whether happiness is the way for me, really. I think it's about peace. And I think
For me as well, it's calm, peaceful, and contentment.
Yeah. And I think for me, I have spent so long wanting peace and thinking I'll never find it. And I think the secret is, if you want peace, you've just got to live peacefully. And it's like sitting still. If you want to learn to sit still, sit still. So I think the secret is for peace is to just choose peaceful ways, go gently, and practice living peacefully. That's what I'm trying to do.
It's so wonderful. Honestly, I loved this conversation. I hope all of you have enjoyed it as much as I did. Consider that little voice in your head and the Yoga Manifesto. We're here at Pan Macmillan. Thank you guys so much for the room, beautiful space where we can join our thoughts onto so interesting topics. Both books coming out May 26th in the UK. Mine is coming out a little later in the US. But you can pre-order anywhere in the world already. Dutch is coming out 30th of May for my book. And as always, I invite you to come here and join us for conversations that will just ask you to slow down and find an hour to reflect on a topic you may have not thought about before, or to reflect on a topic differently. I hope you enjoyed our conversation on yoga today. Share it with others, especially those who may benefit from looking at yoga in a different way. I've been honored, honestly, Nadia.
It's been an absolute pleasure and joy.
Yoga activist and gangster. Thank you for joining me today. Thank you all for joining. I'd like to remind you, as always, that it doesn't matter how busy you are today. There's always a tiny little bit of time to slow down. While you're at it, why don't you just like the podcast and, give it a 5 stars, or join the YouTube channel. They always tell me to remind you to do this because somehow you forget. I love you all for listening, and I will see you next time.